let me say that at the beginning of the 20th century, there was an architect named Adolf Loos that proposed that only a small part of architecture belongs to art. And he said, the sepulchre and the monument. He meant to assert that art takes place where the idea of sepulchre and monument, the idea of a place of exception that life has led up to, but that transcends or reopens life's function. Important to Loos is the ethical function. The confrontation with death prevents us from going on with the usual business of life and carries us to another place. Something beyond what we see. Knowing that someone is buried there is very different than knowing the name, but we connects to our own humanity. Whoever that person may be, there is a connection. The word monumentum derives from the Latin verb moneo, and that means to warn, and signifies something that serves to warn with regard to conduct and future events. So it's important to think that monumentality may be a quality, not a thing. A quality that places or objects have to make us recall, think, or evoke something beyond themselves. The combination, as a combination of place of memory and remembrance, these places are produced to be historic referential. This is in Chile, as in Buenos Aires. As embodiments of memory through art in the public realm, the value of these projects is not based on the artwork, but in a point beyond themselves. It lies in the public dimension of what people call dialogic character of memorial space. That is the kind of dialogue that you could establish with the past. Time is the matter. This is our project for the Holocaust Museum in Buenos Aires. You'll see some images. Time is the matter here. Also, all these projects, in a certain way, present to us and raise issues that are not architectural only, but are moral, ethical, and philosophical. And among them, the way history and histories, memory and traumas, will be appropriated, represented, and inhabited. But the architect's role, you know, these are sites that you can probably remember. The architect's role has always been to create a theater for action and of memory. A theater that is capable of embodying truths that, even though they are culturally diverse and specific, this truth make possible for humanity to affirm life and contemplate possibilities of a better future. So, again, this notion of a theater for memory, a theater for action, is what architects do. So, in the face of catastrophe and memories of catastrophes, the architects and the artist roles become increasingly complex, problematic, and hopefully necessary. But we need to be mindful and wary of the expectation of creating instant metaphor and artificial meanings before this image. Neither art nor architecture can nor should attempt to compensate public trauma or mass murder. It is in the case that in the kind of wake of catastrophe appears to be that a redemptive aesthetic often that emerges in affected communities attempt to create what you could call regenerative space. The redemptive aesthetic asks from us to consider art as a correction of life. Assuming that a certain repetition of experience in art, like, you know, the Zanzibar Memorial, may repair damaged experience, you know, experience that may not be possible to be repaired in a direct way. Leo Bersani writes, and I quote, "The catastrophes of history appear to matter much less if they are somehow compensated for in art." And this is a warning for us. So what we could do is to establish a dialogic relation between us and traumatic events and frame the process to our understanding. This is Center for Holocaust Studies at Clark University. It is crucial to attempt the distance that exists between ourselves and these events as questions which puts us in question in the sense offered by Levinas. we can offer only the prospect that the chronological limbo, the no man's land, the space that exists between memory and history may be traversed with generational piety, intellectual honesty, and ethical respect. This is, in France, the last project I will show. So, indeed, to work through these kinds of projects requires a persistent attempt to work within and to transform the public sphere. It involves establishing what I call an ethical framework to position ourselves as engaged witnesses. Engaged witnesses. This demands a very precise, dialogic and committed attitude towards design, towards techniques, towards materials, towards sites of memory, towards history, especially towards the voices of others. Again, this is the desaparecidos in Buenos Aires. Philosophers like Giorgio Agamben have theorized the position of the witness as the basis of the ethical political relation, insofar as the witness answers to the suffering of others without usurping the place of the other. Again, the witness answers to the suffering of other without usurping the place of the other. At the core, important questions for our work are: how can we make room for the voices of those other to appear in public without attempting to speak for them, not to represent their pain? What about those who can speak, those who have names, and those who don't have names that we may know? How about those, how can we welcome the others that as an enigma of a face that resists possession and cannot be fully known, as Levinas would have said, enigma of a face, those people who address us from the deep wells of history and the present wells of memory in our democratic societies? Our culture, our practice, our teaching, or my teaching, is grounded in these questions and these attitudes. I characterize this as ethical deferral, kind of deference to the other while asserting our work. This approach involves inhabiting what I call inhabiting distance as one place for action. The distance between the act and remembrance, between recollected worlds and worlds to be transformed. This approach entails asserting presence and authorship through dynamic interaction and imbrication of conceptual work and material world. This is our visit to Nantes, the underground space that I will show in a moment. We're transforming into a memorial to the abolition of slavery in France. So let me go directly to that project, because so we can have some time for discussion. Let me just simply say that I'd rather go to show you specifically 3 projects in a very compact way. The significance of this work has to do with what we call, for what we think of them as working memorials. Memorials that work, memorials that help the work of memory. The action of memory, the action of thinking. So this is the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies that we believe has to do with participation and discussion at Clark University. It was in a historic district, and the project is a small library and the transformation of the whole house. This is the reading room, and the only relation that exists between the old house and the new building is framed by large windows and the presence of that tree that is in what I call an inaccessible courtyard. This is the library, and basically they use the space very much for any kind of endeavor. At the Holocaust Museum in Buenos Aires, the proposal was to construct, given the difficulties of talking or thinking about a single, what you call a single narrative in space on a subject like the Holocaust, we talked about creating 3 modes of narratives that are clearly demarcated. One is the archives of objects. The second one at the center of the whole project is the